Republicans tended to think Lincoln was a hillbilly, uneducated and not very bright, and that he would do what he was told. He was not held in high esteem. In fact, he was elected primarily his qualifications were that he was unknown and he had no real power base, so they figured that they could control him. Lincoln created a coalition cabinet of different parts of the Republican Party, meaning that he took leaders from different points of view in the Republican Party and made his cabinet, which is why one of the recent books about him is called Team of Rivals. Lincoln ignored the Constitution. Lincoln is probably the least constitutional president in American history. In fact, he would say about the Constitution, it is foolish to lose the whole by being afraid to disregard a part, meaning that if following the Constitution means losing the country, the South succeeding, then I should ignore the Constitution. And he did frequently. He sent troops into war without a declaration of war. Now, he did this through the amazing mental gymnastics of claiming that the South had not seceded, therefore they were still part of the United States, yet they were an enemy and would have to petition to be readmitted into the Union after the war was over. So when he wanted them to be, the South was still part of the United States. When he didn't want them to be, the South was its own separate entity. He increased Army funding without approval. This is a major violation of the Constitution. The president is not supposed to be able to spend money without the money being allocated by Congress. But Lincoln did this. He blockaded the South. Now, there were peace Democrats. These were called Copperheads. These were Democrats who wanted the war to end. They didn't necessarily support the South. They just didn't support the war. Lincoln had these people arrested. He had newspaper publishers arrested and their newspapers shut down if they were critical of him. He suspended habeas corpus and claimed the right to arrest anybody he wanted for any reason he wanted without charging them of a crime. He began doing this only in border states, but by 1862, his martial law had expanded all throughout the United States. Probably most interesting to me is Lincoln exiled a U.S. senator, Vallandigham, from Ohio. He threw him out of the country. There is nothing in the Constitution that says anyone can throw somebody out of the country, much less the president do this with no court, no trial, nothing. Lincoln was a dictator, in effect, which, as my students know, I don't like him. This is part of the reason. And he wasn't popular. In 1862, the Republicans lost badly in the congressional elections. And in 1864, Lincoln is terrified that he won't win re-election, which of course would mean the war would end. And so he creates a unity ticket. In 1864, Lincoln actually doesn't run as a Republican. He runs for the Union Party, which means he's a Republican, and his vice presidential candidate is a Democrat, Andrew Johnson of Tennessee. The Democrats run George B. McClellan. We'll talk a lot more about him later. He's a former general who had been kind of jerked around by Lincoln. On a truce platform, McClellan says, elect me and I'll end the war right away. Lincoln is looking like he'll lose. And in fact, it is only a couple of major positive turns in the war in 1864, particularly William Tecumseh Sherman taking Atlanta, that allow Lincoln to win this election. He does end up winning it easily. But he only wins it because after Sherman takes Atlanta, Northerners figure the war is almost over anyway, so why vote for a truce candidate when you can have a victory in a war? If military events had gone the other way, though, Lincoln certainly would have lost in 1864. The Republicans were united on the war and economics, but they were split badly on slavery. The radical Republicans, led by Thaddeus Stevens, who probably is really what most people think Lincoln is, a guy who actually wanted to free the slaves, a Pennsylvania senator, and Charles Sumner of Massachusetts wanted abolition. They wanted slavery ended right away. Conservative Republicans, which Lincoln was one, wanted to simply stop the spread of slavery. In 1861, the Confiscation Act allowed the U.S. Army to take the slaves of insurrectionists, meaning if you were in rebellion, the government could seize your slaves from you. Slavery is abolished by Congress, not by Lincoln, in D.C. and the Western Territories in 1862, although the owners are given money for the slaves that are taken from them. And in July of 1862, Congress allows free slaves to be soldiers. And as the war drags on, it slowly becomes clear that emancipation or abolition is the goal. The radicals begin to gain more and more power in Congress, and Lincoln, in order to work with Congress, is forced to move more and more towards an abolitionist policy. On September 2nd of 1862, Lincoln, after the Battle of Antietam, announces a plan to free the slaves. And on January 1st of 1863, this is important to understand, this is right after an election because he didn't want to do it before the election, Lincoln issues the Emancipation Proclamation. Now, the proclamation does nothing at all except make it clear that abolition was the goal. Because what the proclamation says is that any slave in a part of the country that is currently in rebellion is now free. Well, Lincoln has no ability or authority to free those slaves. Saying that slaves in Georgia are free when you don't control Georgia doesn't mean anything. The Emancipation Proclamation freed absolutely nobody. And there were lots of slaves under territory Lincoln did control that he could have freed. Kentucky, Delaware, Maryland, Missouri all come to mind. But Lincoln did not free those slaves. But it did make it clear that if the North won the war, the slaves would be free. That's the importance of the Emancipation Proclamation. In 1865, shortly before his death, Lincoln will push through, or actually Lincoln won't, the radical Republicans will push through the 13th Amendment, which ends slavery for good. 186,000 freed blacks would fight in the war effort. There was not much interest among blacks in supporting the North until the Emancipation Proclamation, because black folks understood this war wasn't being fought for them. This war was being fought over economic differences. But when Lincoln issues the Emancipation Proclamation, they begin to believe it could mean the end of slavery. The 54th Massachusetts is the most famous of these units. It had white officers. Black people were not put in any positions of power. The Northerners believed blacks were inferior, just like the Southerners did. But it was actually served in combat, at Fort Wagner particularly, quite nobly. There's a pretty good historical movie called Glory. If you're interested in this, you might check out. Most black units weren't allowed to fight. They did menial jobs. They dug ditches. They transported material and men. Although even despite of this, they still had a higher mortality rate than whites. They were more likely to get sick or to get bad food or something and die that way than whites. And they were only paid a third of what whites were paid. And probably most disturbing, if a white guy was captured by the South, he would be a prisoner of war and they would negotiate for his release. If a black soldier was captured by the South, he would be immediately killed. Of course, as always happens in war, women have to step in and do the jobs that are normally associated with men. Jobs like teacher, sales clerk, office worker, mill and factory hands. Women stepped into these jobs. And some of them they never gave up. Teacher, particularly, is a job that had been a male job but became a female job in the Civil War. Nursing is the most important, though. Dorothea Dix, remember the lady who reformed prisons, will organize women as nurses for the war. Men didn't like this. They didn't think women should be in a place where men were bedridden and not fully dressed. But it was necessary, and so it happened. It was presented as an application of maternal instincts, just like your mom took care of you when you were a sick little boy. Now that you're an injured Civil War soldier, a motherly figure is going to come take care of you. Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton will use this to argue for women's rights. And this will actually open up two major careers, like I said, nursing and teaching, as realistic possibilities for women to support themselves and be a significant step forward for women in America.